Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. What do you think, dear? The warm voice came from behind, belonging to Aunt Martha. Her eyes crinkled with a mixture of pride and affection as she adjusted the collar of the dress. Henrietta now, took a deep breath. It's surreal, she whispered, her voice higher and softer than she'd ever heard it. I barely recognize myself. Aunt Martha chuckled, patting Henrietta's shoulder. That's the point, isn't it? To see yourself as you truly are, not as others expect you to be. Henrietta nodded, a lump forming in her throat. For years, she'd hidden this part of herself, terrified of the consequences. But here, in Aunt Martha's cozy cottage on the outskirts of town, she finally felt safe enough to explore her true identity. Now, let's do something about that makeup, Aunt Martha said, guiding Henrietta to a vanity tucked in the corner of the guest room. A little blush, some mascara. You'll be turning heads in no time. As her aunt worked, applying cosmetics with practiced ease, Henrietta closed her eyes and let herself relax. The scent of lavender from Aunt Martha's garden wafted through the open window, mingling with the powdery smell of makeup. There, Aunt Martha announced after a few minutes. Take a look. Henrietta opened her eyes and gasped. The face staring back at her was softer, more feminine. Her cheekbones seemed higher, her lips fuller. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the person she'd always known existed beneath the surface. It's me, she breathed, touching her cheek in wonder. Aunt Martha beamed. Of course it is, dear. It's always been you. Now, are you ready to go out and face the world? A flicker of fear passed through Henrietta's eyes. I don't know. What if someone recognizes me? Nonsense, Aunt Martha said firmly. We're miles from anyone who knows you as Hank. Besides, you look completely different. Trust me, no one will give you a second glance, except to admire how lovely you are. Henrietta took another deep breath, smoothing down the front of her dress. It was a pretty thing, pale blue with tiny white flowers scattered across the fabric. Okay, she said, squaring her shoulders. Let's do this. Aunt Martha clapped her hands together. Wonderful! I thought we could start with a nice lunch at the cafe in town. How does that sound? Perfect, Henrietta replied, surprised to find she meant it. The idea of being seen in public, of interacting with strangers as her true self, was both terrifying and exhilarating. They made their way downstairs, Henrietta wobbling slightly on her low heels. Aunt Martha handed her a small purse that matched her dress. Your essentials are in there. Lipstick, compact, and a bit of cash. Oh, and I almost forgot. She disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a delicate silver necklace. This was your grandmother's. I think she'd want you to have it. Tears pricked at Henrietta's eyes as Aunt Martha fastened the necklace around her neck. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. Don't mention it, dear. Now, shall we? The drive into town was short but nerve-wracking. Henrietta found herself obsessively checking her reflection in the passenger side mirror, making sure her wig was straight and her makeup hadn't smudged. Relax, Aunt Martha said gently as they pulled into a parking spot on Main Street. You look beautiful. Just be yourself. Henrietta nodded, taking a final deep breath before stepping out of the car. The sunshine felt warm on her face, and a light breeze ruffled her skirt. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but also strangely free. The cafe was bustling with the lunch crowd when they entered. Henrietta tensed, certain that everyone was staring at her, but as she glanced around, she realized that no one was paying her any particular attention. They were seated at a small table near the window, and a friendly waitress approached with menus. Good afternoon, ladies, she said with a smile. Can I start you off with something to drink? Henrietta froze for a moment, then managed to stammer out, Iced tea, please. Make that, too, Aunt Martha added smoothly. As the waitress walked away, Henrietta let out a shaky breath. She called us ladies. she whispered, a grin spreading across her face. Of course she did, Aunt Martha replied with a wink. Because that's exactly what we are. The rest of the lunch passed in a pleasant blur. Henrietta found herself relaxing more and more, even engaging in light conversation with their waitress. By the time they finished their meal, she felt almost comfortable in her new skin. What do you say we do a bit of shopping? Aunt Martha suggested as they left the cafe. You could use a few more outfits if you're going to be staying with me for a while. Henrietta hesitated. Lunch in a crowded cafe was one thing, but trying on clothes? I'm not sure. It'll be fine, Aunt Martha assured her. I know a lovely little boutique just down the street. The owner is a dear friend of mine and very discreet. Before Henrietta could protest further, Aunt Martha was steering her down the sidewalk. They passed several storefronts, and Henrietta found herself marveling at how different the world looked from this perspective. She'd walked these same streets countless times as Hank, but never had she noticed the way other women's eyes lingered on shop windows or how men's gazes sometimes followed them as they passed. The boutique was a charming little shop, its window display featuring an array of colorful dresses and accessories. A bell tinkled as they entered, and a petite woman with short gray hair looked up from behind the counter. "Martha!" she exclaimed, coming around to greet them. "What a lovely surprise! And who's this beautiful young lady?" "Hello, Evelyn," Aunt Martha replied warmly. "This is my niece, Henrietta. She's staying with me for a while and in need of a new wardrobe." Evelyn's eyes twinkled as she looked Henrietta up and down. "Well, we can certainly help with that. What did you have in mind, dear?" Henrietta blushed, overwhelmed by the racks of feminine clothing surrounding her. I'm not sure. This is all very new to me." Understanding dawned in Evelyn's eyes, and she nodded. "Not to worry. We'll start with the basics and go from there. Why don't you browse a bit while I pull some things I think might suit you?" For the next hour, Henrietta found herself in a whirlwind of fabrics, colors, and styles. She tried on dresses, skirts, blouses, and even a pair of tailored slacks that made her legs look impossibly long. With each outfit, she felt more confident, more herself. "Oh, that's stunning on you!" Evelyn exclaimed as Henrietta emerged from the fitting room in a deep green wrap dress. "The color really brings out your eyes." Henrietta turned to look in the mirror and felt a rush of joy. The woman staring back at her was elegant, poised, and undeniably feminine. For the first time in her life, her outer appearance matched how she felt inside. "I'll take it," she said decisively. By the time they left the boutique, laden with bags, the sun was starting to dip towards the horizon. Henrietta felt exhilarated but exhausted, the events of the day catching up with her. "Why don't we head home?" Aunt Martha suggested, noticing her fatigue. "We can have a quiet dinner and you can model your new outfits for me." Henrietta nodded gratefully. As they drove back to the cottage, she found herself lost in thought, reflecting on how much her life had changed in just a few short hours. Back at the house, Aunt Martha busied herself in the kitchen while Henrietta changed into one of her new outfits, a soft, flowing maxi dress in shades of purple and blue. She twirled in front of the mirror, marveling at how natural it felt. "Dinner's ready," Aunt Martha called from downstairs. As they sat down to eat, Henrietta couldn't help but smile. "Thank you again," she said softly, "for accepting me, for helping me. I never thought I'd be able to be me." Aunt Martha reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You've always been you, dear. It just took a little while for the outside to catch up with the inside. I'm just glad I could help you on your journey." After dinner, they settled in the living room with cups of tea. Henrietta curled up on the sofa, feeling more relaxed and content than she could ever remember being. "So?" Aunt Martha said, a hint of mischief in her voice. "What's next on your adventure as Henrietta?" Henrietta considered the question. Now that she'd taken this first monumental step, a world of possibilities seemed to open up before her. I'm not sure, she admitted. But I think I'd like to stay here for a while, if that's okay. Figure things out? Of course it is, Aunt Martha replied warmly. This is your home for as long as you need it to be, and we'll take things one day at a time. As the evening wore on, they talked about everything and nothing. Henrietta's hopes and fears for the future, funny stories from Aunt Martha's youth, plans for the garden. It was well past midnight when Henrietta finally yawned and stretched. I should probably get some sleep, she said reluctantly. It's been quite a day. Aunt Martha nodded, standing up to give her a hug. Sleep well, dear, and remember tomorrow is a brand new day, your first full day as Henrietta. Upstairs in the guest room, her room now, Henrietta supposed, she carefully removed her makeup and changed into a silky nightgown. As she slipped between the cool sheets, she felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. For the first time in her life, she was truly herself, and while she knew there would be challenges ahead, she also knew she wasn't facing them alone. With Aunt Martha's support and her own newfound confidence, Henrietta was ready to embrace whatever the future might hold. She drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, dreaming of the endless possibilities that awaited her in the morning. The next few weeks passed in a blur of new experiences and self-discovery for Henrietta. Each day brought fresh challenges and triumphs as she navigated life as her true self. One sunny morning, about a month into her stay, Henrietta stood in front of the mirror, carefully applying her makeup. She'd become quite adept at it, thanks to Aunt Martha's patient tutelage. Today, she opted for a natural look, just a touch of mascara, a hint of blush, and a sheer lip gloss. Henrietta, Aunt Martha's voice called from downstairs. Are you ready? We don't want to be late. Coming, Henrietta replied, giving herself one last critical look. She smoothed down her cream-colored blouse and adjusted the waistband of her navy skirt. Today was a big day. Her first job interview as Henrietta. She'd spent the past week poring over job listings, finally settling on a position at the local library. It seemed like the perfect fit. Quiet, low-key, and surrounded by books, which had always been a passion of hers. As she descended the stairs, Aunt Martha beamed at her. You look wonderful, dear. Professional but approachable. Perfect for a librarian. Henrietta smiled nervously. I hope so. I'm terrified they'll see right through me. Nonsense, Aunt Martha said firmly. You're a capable, intelligent woman with a love of literature. That's all they need to see. The drive to the library was short, but Henrietta's stomach was in knots the entire way. As they pulled into the parking lot, Aunt Martha reached over and gave her hand a squeeze. You've got this, she said encouragingly. Just be yourself. Henrietta nodded, taking a deep breath before stepping out of the car. The library was a beautiful old building, all red brick and ivy. She straightened her shoulders and walked up the stone steps, her heels clicking against the pavement. Inside, the air was cool and filled with the comforting smell of old books. Henrietta approached the front desk, where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up at her. Can I help you? She asked with a smile. Yes, I'm here for an interview with Mrs. Tompkins, Henrietta replied, proud of how steady her voice sounded. Oh, of course. You must be Henrietta. I'm Carol, the assistant librarian. Mrs. Tompkins is expecting you. Right this way. As Carol led her through the stacks, Henrietta felt her nervousness start to fade. This place felt right, somehow, like she belonged here. Mrs. Tompkins, the head librarian, was a tall, elegant woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She greeted Henrietta warmly and gestured for her to take a seat. So, Henrietta, she began, glancing at the resume on her desk, tell me why you're interested in working at our library. For the next hour, Henrietta found herself engaged in a passionate discussion about literature, library science, and community outreach. She spoke about her favorite authors, her ideas for children's reading programs, and her belief in the importance of public libraries as cornerstones of democracy. By the time the interview was over, Henrietta was flushed with excitement. Mrs. Tompkins was smiling broadly as she stood to shake her hand. "Well, Henrietta, I must say I'm very impressed. We'll be in touch soon, but I have a feeling you'll fit in wonderfully here." As Henrietta left the library, practically floating on air, she saw Aunt Martha waiting in the car. She slid into the passenger seat with a grin. "How did it go?" Aunt Martha asked eagerly. I think it went really well," Henrietta replied, still somewhat in disbelief. "Mrs. Tompkins said they'd be in touch soon, but she seemed to like me." "Of course she did," Aunt Martha said proudly, "because she saw the real you, intelligent, passionate, and full of potential." As they drove home, Henrietta felt a surge of gratitude for her aunt's unwavering support. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she said softly. Aunt Martha reached over to pat her knee. "You had it in you all along, dear. I just provided a safe space for you to bloom." The next few days were a mixture of nervous anticipation and quiet contentment for Henrietta. She busied herself helping Aunt Martha in the garden, losing herself in the soothing rhythms of planting and weeding. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch, sipping iced tea and watching the sunset. It was during one of these peaceful evenings that the phone rang. Aunt Martha went to answer it, returning a few moments later with a wide smile. "It's for you," she said, handing Henrietta the cordless phone. "Mrs. Tompkins from the library?" Henrietta's heart raced as she took the phone. "Hello?" "Henrietta, this is Elizabeth Tompkins. I'm calling to offer you the position of junior librarian. We were very impressed with your interview and believe you'd be a valuable addition to our team. Are you interested?" For a moment, Henrietta was speechless. Then a wide grin spread across her face. Yes, I'm definitely interested. Thank you so much, Mrs. Tompkins." After working out the details of her start date and salary, Henrietta hung up the phone and turned to Aunt Martha, who was practically bouncing with anticipation. "I got the job!" Henrietta exclaimed, throwing her arms around her aunt. Aunt Martha hugged her tightly. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so proud of you. This calls for a celebration. How about we go out for dinner?" That night, as they sat in a cozy Italian restaurant, toasting Henrietta's new job with glasses of wine, she felt a sense of peace and rightness that she'd never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she was truly living as herself, pursuing her passions, and being accepted for who she was. "To new beginnings," Aunt Martha said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," Henrietta echoed, clinking her glass against her aunt's. As she sipped her wine, she realized that this was just the start. She had a whole life ahead of her, a life as Henrietta full of possibilities and promise. The weeks flew by, and before Henrietta knew it, it was her first day at the library. She stood in front of her closet, deliberating over what to wear. Finally, she settled on a knee-length pencil skirt in soft gray, paired with a pale pink blouse and low heels. Professional, but still feminine. As she made her way downstairs, Aunt Martha was waiting with a packed lunch and a thermos of coffee. "You look perfect," she said, giving Henrietta a quick hug. "Now go show them what you're made of!" The morning was a whirlwind of introductions, orientation, and training. Henrietta found herself falling in love with the library all over again. The smell of books, the quiet hush broken only by whispered conversations, and the soft tap of computer keys, the satisfaction of helping patrons find exactly what they were looking for. It all felt right. Her co-workers were welcoming and kind, quickly incorporating her into their little library family. By lunchtime, Henrietta felt like she'd been working there for years. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Henrietta settled into her new life. She threw herself into her work at the library, coming up with innovative ideas for community programs and children's reading initiatives. Mrs. Tompkins was impressed with her enthusiasm and creativity, often praising her in front of the other staff. Outside of work, Henrietta began to build a life for herself in the small town. She joined a book club, made friends with some of the regulars at the library, and even started volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends. Slowly but surely, she was becoming a part of the community. One Saturday afternoon, as Henrietta was shelving books in the fiction section, she heard a familiar voice that made her freeze. "Excuse me, miss, can you help me find something?" She turned slowly, her heart pounding, to find herself face to face with Tom, her old college roommate. For a moment, she panicked, certain he would recognize her, but as she met his eyes, she saw only polite curiosity. "Of course," she managed to say, her voice steady despite her internal turmoil. "What are you looking for?" As she helped Tom locate the book he wanted, making small talk about authors and genres, Henrietta felt a surge of confidence. Here she was, interacting with someone from her past life, and he had no idea who she really was. She wasn't just passing as a woman. She was a woman through and through. After Tom left, Henrietta retreated to the break room, needing a moment to collect herself. As she sipped a cup of tea, she reflected on how far she'd come. Just a few months ago, the idea of running into someone from her past would have terrified her. Now, while it had been nerve-wracking, she'd handled it with grace and poise. That evening, as she recounted the incident to Aunt Martha over dinner, her aunt reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "You see," she said softly, "you're stronger than you know, Henrietta. You've always been this person. Now the whole world can see it too." As summer faded into autumn, Henrietta found herself facing a new challenge. The library was hosting a big fundraising gala, and as one of the newer staff members, she was expected to attend. The idea of a formal event with dancing and mingling was daunting. "What if I make a fool of myself?" she fretted to Aunt Martha as they shopped for a suitable dress. "I've never been to something like this as me." "You'll be fine," Aunt Martha assured her, holding up a midnight blue gown for inspection. "Just be yourself. That's more than enough." The night of the gala arrived, and Henrietta stood in front of her mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The blue dress fit her perfectly, accentuating her figure in all the right places. Her hair was swept up in an elegant updo, and her makeup was more glamorous than her usual daytime look. As she descended the stairs, Aunt Martha gasped. "Oh, Henrietta," she breathed. "You look absolutely stunning." The gala was held in the town's historic hotel ballroom. As Henrietta entered, she felt a moment of panic at the sea of unfamiliar faces. But then she spotted Carol, the assistant librarian, waving her over. "Henrietta, you look gorgeous," Carol gushed. "Come on, let me introduce you to some people." As the evening progressed, Henrietta found herself relaxing. She chatted with local officials about the importance of library funding, laughed at jokes told by wealthy donors, and even managed a few dances without stepping on anyone's toes. Towards the end of the night, as she was taking a breather near the refreshment table, a handsome man in a well-tailored suit approached her. "I don't believe we've met," he said with a charming smile. "I'm David. I'm on the library board." "Henrietta," she replied, shaking his offered hand. "I'm one of the librarians." They fell into easy conversation, discussing favorite books and the challenges facing modern libraries. Henrietta found herself captivated by David's intelligence and wit. As the band struck up a slow song, he held out his hand. "Would you care to dance?" he asked. For a moment, Henrietta hesitated. This was uncharted territory, dancing with a man who saw her as she truly was. But something in David's warm eyes gave her courage. "I'd love to," she said, taking his hand. As they swayed to the music, Henrietta felt a rush of emotions. Joy at being accepted as herself, pride in how far she'd come, and perhaps a flicker of something else. The possibility of romance, of a future she'd never dared to imagine before. When the song ended, David smiled down at her. "I've really enjoyed talking with you, Henrietta. Would you perhaps like to get coffee sometime?" Henrietta felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "I'd like that," she said softly. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.